Hi everyone. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today, we're going to embark on a terrifying short stories under 10 minutes. A journey through different cultures, exploring some of the scariest horror stories from around the world. But before we begin, I want to know, what is the scariest horror story you've ever heard? Share it in the comments, and let's discover together what lies ahead.
1. Library of Lost Souls. I always loved working late at the old university library in Edinburgh. The quiet, the smell of aged paper, and the dim lighting created a serene atmosphere. One evening, as I was shelving books in the rare manuscript section, I noticed a peculiar tome that wasn't in the system. Its cover was made of old leather, and the pages were brittle. Opening it, I found handwritten notes in a language I couldn't decipher. Suddenly, I felt a chill and heard whispers echoing through the stacks. The lights flickered, and I saw shadowy figures moving between the shelves. Panicking, I tried to leave, but the shadows surrounded me. The next morning, my colleagues found the book on the floor with a new entry, my name and a date from the 18th century. 2. Desolate Highway. Driving through the Australian outback at night was both thrilling and terrifying. I was on my way to visit a friend in Alice Springs when my car broke down in the middle of nowhere. The vast emptiness was overwhelming, and there was no cell signal. As I waited for help, I noticed a flickering light in the distance. Thinking it might be a farmhouse, I walked towards it. The light led me to an old, abandoned gas station. Inside, I found a dusty, cobweb-covered phone and tried to call for help, but there was no dial tone. Suddenly, the lights went out, and I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw a figure in an old attendant's uniform, staring at me with hollow eyes. I bolted out and ran back to my car, which now started without issue. The next day, I learned that the gas station had been abandoned for decades after a series of mysterious deaths. 3. Carnival of Fear. When a traveling carnival set up in our small town in Kansas, I couldn't resist visiting. The bright lights, music, and laughter created an enticing atmosphere. As I wandered through the attractions, I noticed a small, out-of-the-way tent labeled Fortunes Told. Curiosity got the better of me, and I entered. Inside, an old woman with piercing eyes sat behind a crystal ball. She offered to read my future, and I agreed. Her eyes turned white, and she spoke in a voice not her own, describing events that had happened to me in the past with eerie accuracy. Then she said, "Your future is empty." I laughed it off, but when I left the tent, the carnival was deserted, and the sky was pitch black. I ran home, but when I arrived, my house was empty, as if I had never existed. 4. Echoes of the Past. I took a job renovating an old mansion in Savannah, Georgia. The house had a rich history, filled with tales of tragedy and loss. One afternoon, as I was working in the basement, I found a hidden door leading to a small, furnished room. It looked like a child's playroom, untouched for years. On the table was a music box. I wound it up, and a haunting melody filled the room. Suddenly, I felt a presence and turned to see a little girl in a tattered dress standing in the corner. She stared at me with sad eyes, then vanished. The next day, I found an old newspaper article about a family who had lived there and whose daughter had gone missing. Her description matched the girl I had seen. Later, I discovered that the music box played a lullaby that the girl's mother used to sing to her. 5. Theater of Shadows. As an actor in a renowned theater company in New York City, I often stayed late to rehearse. One night, I was alone on stage when I heard applause coming from the empty seats. Confused, I looked out into the darkened audience and saw faint, ghostly figures clapping. A chill ran down my spine, but I continued rehearsing. The applause grew louder, and the figures became more defined. Suddenly, the stage lights went out, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. The next morning, the director told me about a tragic fire that had killed the original cast and audience decades ago. When I checked the stage again, I found a program from that fateful night with my name listed among the deceased actors. 6. Farmhouse haunting. I moved to a remote farmhouse in Iowa to escape the chaos of city life. The tranquility was perfect, but strange things started happening. One night, I heard the sound of footsteps upstairs. Investigating, I found nothing but an old rocking chair moving on its own. The next day, I discovered an old family photo album in the attic, filled with pictures of a family who had lived there in the 1800s. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed a woman who looked exactly like me. That night, I dreamt of the same woman being dragged out of the house by angry villagers. When I woke up, I found muddy footprints leading from my bed to the front door. The next day, the local historian told me the story of the woman who was accused of witchcraft and lynched by the townspeople. 7. Ghostly train ride. Commuting by train through the Scottish Highlands was usually peaceful. One evening, I took the last train home and found the carriage unusually empty. As the train moved, I heard faint voices and saw shadowy figures in the reflection of the window. The conductor walked by, but when I tried to speak to him, he ignored me. Suddenly, the train screeched to a halt, and the lights flickered. The figures became more defined, revealing themselves as passengers from different eras. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and turned to see a pale woman in Victorian attire. She whispered something I couldn't understand. The next morning, I woke up in my seat with the train at the final stop, completely empty. Later, I learned that the train route had a history of mysterious disappearances. 8. Museum of Horrors. I was a night guard at a history museum in Rome, which was usually uneventful. One night, during my rounds, I heard a noise coming from the ancient artifacts exhibit. As I approached, I saw a display case open and a Roman helmet on the floor. Picking it up, I felt a sudden rush of cold air and saw a figure in Roman armor standing in the corner. He looked at me with hollow eyes and mouthed something in Latin. The lights flickered and he vanished. The next day, the curator showed me an old journal detailing the life of a Roman soldier who had been cursed. The helmet was his, and it was said to bring misfortune to anyone who touched it. I felt a sharp pain in my head, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a ghostly image of the soldier behind me. 9. Hotel of Nightmares. During a business trip to New Orleans, I stayed at a historic hotel in the French Quarter. The place had a charming, old-world feel, but something felt off. That night, I was awakened by the sound of a music box playing. I followed the sound to the end of the hallway, where I found an old room that wasn't on the hotel map. Inside, the room was filled with antique toys and dusty furniture. The music box stopped, and I saw a child's drawing on the wall depicting a fire. Suddenly, the room grew unbearably hot, and I heard the screams of children. I rushed out, but when I looked back, the room was gone. The next morning, the hotel manager told me about a fire that had killed several children in that very spot decades ago. I checked out immediately, but the drawing was in my suitcase.
Thank you for watching, especially to the subscribers for supporting our stories. What story do you like the most? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. See you in the next video.